Hi, welcome to the next in our series of sessions on technology and how we deal with it in a safe manner. This week, I'd like to cover how we specifically interface with technology. Till now, I was talking about more general issues and how that works with technology. Today, I'd like to focus in specifically on things that we need to think about specifically in terms of technology, not just general concepts and how they relate. I mean, these are somewhat general, but they are very much technology specific. Okay. So the first really important thing, and I mentioned this earlier, was the concept of America's nicht anders, which was, how the Rebbeinu encapsulated a certain worldview. This is really, really important with technology. It's a really big problem. People tend to think of technology as different, separate, etc. A very common framework that's used for this, and I really like it because it speaks to what I'm getting at, is the concept of digital citizenship, right? We are citizens of the world, we're citizens of our communities, whatever. And the same thing, part of that citizenship is our technology use. We don't suddenly stop becoming responsible people just because it's technology. And it's really like I'm coming at this from the other direction now, where I'm online, I'm doing a webinar, so or we do email, etc. It's really important to think of our behavior much the same way we do the rest of our world. Now, all of us do compartmentalize on occasion. It's an important thing to realize. At work we behave one way. In school we behave another way. At home, yet another way. But at the end of the day, we are one person. There are certain fundamental principles that we hopefully take into account as we operate. And those principles, the fundamentals, apply to our use of technology online, on social media, in email, in other messaging apps, etc. That's just the way it is. We are citizens of the world, whether or not we are using technology to interface with the world. Another really, really important thing is, it's really important. I see a lot of people who talk about technology like it is the most dangerous thing. There has never been a bigger challenge. It's, insurmountable, or even if it's not insurmountable. I was just really, really overstating the case. Okay. That's really bad. And, I've talked a little bit about this, prior, you lose a lot of credibility, but also it's if you're so busy being afraid or overwhelmed, or everything is a problem, then it's very, very hard to really react and prioritize and protect yourself. But by the same token, I worry about the people who aren't worried enough either. Okay. Technology is great. I love it. That's the thing I do all day, every day, is to help people use technology. But it is because I use technology so much that I also realize, how dangerous it is. It's like, and I keep on using the analogy of cars. Cars are wonderful. They have an enormous amount to offer. But you know what? Aside from the issues of, emissions, et cetera, cars can be very dangerous. You need seatbelts. You need seatbelts. You want airbags, et cetera, et cetera. There are ways to make cars a lot safer, but you're not going to do those things if you don't recognize how dangerous a car can be. So this is really, really important. It's so important to both recognize the dangers without overstating it, because that balance is how you figure out how to keep yourself protected, both in terms of the behavior, which is primarily what we've been talking about, but also in terms of which tools to use, which ones make sense, which are useful. And which contexts are, some tools are more useful for some people than for other people. And, even the same tool can be used differently for different people. For instance, filters, just to take a classic example, can be used differently depending who you're using it for. For instance, as you know, in my professional life, on our phones, I have very, fairly tight filters. I have a list of apps that people can use on their phones, and that's it. I wouldn't necessarily do that on the phone of an adult of an adult. And I say not necessarily because for some people it makes sense, to limit what's going on even on their own phone, but it's a different flexibility. But I also, for sure, with young, like if I were giving a smartphone to an early teen, I would absolutely, filter what, put down the law, so to speak, as to what they can put on their phone and actually, block it. If I have an adult child in my household who is paying for their own phone, it's going to be a different conversation, right? So this is what I'm saying about understanding. But again, it's a different conversation, both because dangers and hopefully the ability of an adult to, manage these things are not the same. Okay. So that's, sorry about that interruption. So that is a really, again, keeping that balance of knowing, talking again about filters, with my kids, I have a list of, a white list of what sites they can go to, whatever it is, school related, work related, whatever. For myself, I have a lot more flexibility. I do have a filter, by the way. And I've said this before, using the internet without a filter is just like using a car without seatbelts, without, airbags, without basic functions. But I do filter for myself differently than I filtered for my young children when they were young. So that is, that's a really important thing to understand the risks at, for each person at each stage, to understand the risks without minimizing them and without overstating them, which leads to another thing that's really, really important to think about. You need to be intentional about what you want, what you're trying to accomplish, what you want, what you're afraid of, and then make your choices thoughtfully, and really, thinking about what you're doing. And this is only possible, obviously, if you're being realistic about, both the pluses and minuses of the technology. But just as an example, should I get a smartphone? What kind of smartphone? Should I have social media in general? Assuming that I'm going to have social media, what kind of social media? Should I put it on my phone or should I not put it on my phone? These are all ideas and things that we need to think about. There are good reasons to do this and there are good reasons to do otherwise. Okay. But you have to think about it. I know people who don't have smartphones, and I totally respect it because I know that they thought about the advantages of having smartphones. They don't think that smartphones just have nothing to offer them, but they also have made the decision that just because smartphones have something to offer, for them, the benefit of smartphones is outweighed by the problems that smartphones present them. Other people, for instance, use smartphones heavily, but they don't put social media on their phones, which is something that I recommend a lot, that certain types of social media, you're better off not putting on your phone. Okay. But again, the question is not whether you should have social media on your phone, but whether you should have social media on your phone. And if the answer is yes, again, that's not all social media, but in which ones do I want on my phone? So maybe I will have WhatsApp but not Facebook, or maybe I won't have WhatsApp, I'll just have Signal, whatever. Again, you have to think about these things and make choices, and then again on a more narrow basis, not just do I have social media or not, do I put it on my phone or not, but what am I using social media for? How am I using it, right? So, for instance, one thing that I often, talk to people about is what kinds of pictures are you posting on your social media? And, for instance, are you posting pictures of other people? Which I generally, that's a problem, actually. But, and very often when this comes up, when this conversation comes up, people are like taken aback with, why is that a problem? And they've just never thought about the fact that I don't mind if people see that I did A, B, and C, but not everybody has that same level of privacy. Some people are less private, some people are more private, right? Like just about everything else. But you have to think about that. And you have to respect the other person's level of privacy. Or, whether you post pictures of children, your children, other people's children, again, you need to think about those things. I remember years ago, somebody came to me for advice about a friend of hers who I do not know her at all. And she was having some issues, unfortunately, her marriage was falling apart, whatever. And she was having some issues with her ex, and custody and whatever. And, and there was some, issues around the social media. Now, again, I don't know these people. I know the person who came to me, but she was talking to me about somebody who I do not know. So I don't know who's right, who's wrong, whatever. But, there was, like I said, these issues around custody, and she gave me the person's name, and I hopped onto Facebook, and I was able to see a bunch of pictures of this woman's child just, on Facebook, even though I'm not friends. I don't know her. She doesn't know that I exist. Well, this was, years ago, but I could just see all these pictures, and some of them were pictures that really probably should not be shared with the public. And my feedback to my friend was that if your friend is willing to listen and she's interested in your feedback, I would just, strongly suggest to her that she should not post those pictures, or at least lock them down, because somebody could make a legitimate claim that it's not appropriate to have these pictures of your very young child out in the public like this. There could be safety issues, whatever. The point here is not that this mother was a terrible, horrible, very bad, no good person, but I don't think she really thought through the implications of having these pictures of her child, on the internet. And I see this a lot, like, see people who have, pictures of their kids. Oh, my baby just had her first bowel movement on the potty, and they have a picture of the kid, the 2-year-old on the potty, whatever. You really need to think about that. But again, why does it happen? Not because the parent who does that is a terrible, horrible, very bad person, but because they haven't really thought in advance about what it is they're trying to accomplish and how those pictures could travel. Because remember, I post this picture of my child, doing this thing to my friends, and I don't mind them seeing it, but do I know that they are all not going to share that picture? Are my settings locked down enough that some casual wanderer cannot just see these pictures? Yeah, my daughter just commented to me. She was talking about some, her son, who is, a year and a half old, and he was, being very cute in the bath. And she was like talking about, like, should I even take pictures that are going to wind up on Google, Google Photos? And that's a whole conversation. But the fact that she was thinking about, well, this is in a cloud storage. Is it possible that somebody else is going to see it? Is like, I was actually very glad to hear her thinking about that, because whatever she decides, she will make a decision based on information and the thought process about what are the potential impacts, not only to herself, but to her child. And that's really, really important. Okay. And again, I'm not talking about whether or not Google Photos is safe or not, whatever. That's a whole separate discussion. But the point is that she's thinking about it, and she's saying, okay, is this a safe place? Is this a place that can wind up with his pictures in places that I have no control over, that I don't know what's going on with them? And that is one of the areas, again, I'm not talking about being paranoid here, but you have to recognize that when you post stuff, it could go places other than where you posted it. So you need to think about what you're posting, when you're posting, where you're posting. And by the way, the same thing goes with email. It's very easy to forward emails. It's very easy to forward WhatsApps. So you, again, need to think about where you're posting, who you're posting, and what the potential outcomes are. Again, does it mean you should never ever post anything on WhatsApp or Facebook or email? No, it just means, be reasonable and realistic about, is the person I'm sending this to likely to forward it, whatever. And again, Are you going to get it right 100% of the time? Probably not. Again, we are all human, we make mistakes, and also, other people sometimes are unexpected. But again, if we think about this stuff, our chances of doing something that, gets us into trouble is, but again, so that's the thing. You need to be thoughtful and you need to be intentional about what it is you're trying to accomplish. Okay. And this goes to the to what I was just saying about technology is wonderful at doing certain things. One of the things it's really, really good at is spreading information. It's and what's the thing that's really important to understand here is most social media, most communications related technologies, and by the way, not just communications related technologies, for instance, shopping also, e-commerce sites, right? They spend millions of dollars, the better ones, on reducing what's called friction. What's friction? Friction is the thing that keeps you from accomplishing something. Doesn't have to be a big thing, just something that adds a couple of seconds. For instance, they're, talking about e-commerce. There is a lot of research about what happens from the time somebody gets on the site till the time they check out and buy something. And at what point do people leave the site, right? And, so if somebody comes and just, gets some pricing and then leaves and whatever, or just looks at stuff and then leaves, that's one thing. But one thing that they look at a lot is what happens. Why do people come to a site, put stuff into the shopping cart or shopping bag, whatever, right? Like put it on their list of things to buy and then not finish the purchase and not make the purchase, right? And, so the big thing they talk about is friction. What are the little things that make it harder to finish that transaction? Now, when you are the customer dealing with the friction, it can be annoying. But the friction is actually sometimes good for you because it gives you a chance to be intentional, to be thoughtful, and think about, is this really what I want to do? Is this really the best choice for me, right? I got on the site and they're having this sale and all these, great whatever's it is, you're looking for something to decorate your, for a party, and you wind up getting not just, a couple of things for your table, you wind up getting, umpteen different decorations, whatever, right? And the smoother and easier the process is, the more likely you are to buy a lot more than you intended to, right? And then spend money that you maybe didn't have to spend. That, wasn't, not only that you didn't need to spend it, but maybe it was money that really should have gone somewhere else, right? So this is the idea of, the balance for us. So the seller is going to remove all the friction that they can to make it easier for you to buy, whether or not it's good for you. But you, as the buyer, should maybe try to build in some friction, like instead of sitting down at the site with your credit card, sit down at the site, do your shopping, then go get your credit card, right? Don't have it saved in the vendor site, which many do. Go get your credit card so that it's not a big deal. If you really need this stuff, it's only an extra minute. But it's an extra minute that breaks the flow enough for you to stop and say, second, wait, I'm spending that much? Is that really a good idea right now? And maybe the answer is yes, in which case you'll just go ahead and spend the money. You just, okay, so you spent an extra minute. But maybe you stop and think, oh, you know what? Maybe I don't need to spend $150 or $200 or whatever it is. Maybe I don't need to spend this altogether, or maybe I should look at reducing the amount I'm spending, right? So this is shopping, which is one area where people tend not to think about this, because online shopping, I will tell you, I love online shopping. It is great. It is, for many things, it saves me time, it saves me money, it saves me aggravation, right? But if I'm not thoughtful, on not just me, but in general, if one is not thoughtful about what they're spending and what they're, buying, it's very, very easy to overspend. Okay, it's easy to buy stuff that you didn't need, didn't want. Maybe it's something you wanted, but you didn't have as much budget as you wound up spending, whatever. And the truth of the matter is, it's a little bit less likely to happen in person for the very simple reasons. Once you're in the store, right, you still, it's easy to buy more than you intended, but not that easy. Think about it, right? You go into a clothing store and, it's easy to buy more than you intended, but remember, every skirt or top or hat or whatever it is, or headband, you need to look at it and pick it up and maybe try it on, whatever. So each additional item takes effort, right? When you're online, it's a lot easier to put stuff into your cart, into your shopping bag. And it's also a lot easier to go to 10 different stores. Whereas, when you're shopping in person, the amount of physical time it takes, just, it creates the friction I'm talking about to a much greater extent. So, but the downside is that it's harder to get done what you need to get done and what you want to get done. But the upside is it also makes it harder to do the things you don't want to do. And this is where the balance comes in. So I'm not saying don't shop, because again, the time and energy and often money that you save shopping wisely online is worth a lot. But the way to keep yourself from going from saving time, money, and energy to saving time and energy, but spending way, 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 way too much, is by putting just that little bit of friction into your flow so that it can let you stop and think about, is this what I want to spend? The same thing holds true for social media, messaging, etc. And this is across the board. It's not a matter of Facebook or WhatsApp or whatever. Even texting, honestly, especially if you're talking about MMS where you can already send pictures or whatever, you have to really think about what it is you are posting, when you post, to who you post, etc. And there are two pieces to it I generally recommend, right? So one is, in general, make rules for yourself. Okay. So for instance, one rule that I have and that I really think is very important for everybody is I do not post pictures of other people without permission. And I never post pictures of other people's children without their permission. Okay. Because, there's some people, okay, you can post a picture of me, but not my kids. Right. So posting pictures of other people or of children without permission, to me, is a big fat no. Right. So it doesn't matter what I'm doing or how I'm doing, whatever. This is just something, because I, in the first place, thought about it, I am not going to do it. I don't get into that flow where I'm just posting picture. And as long as I'm paying any sort of attention, I will not post those pictures, just as an example. Right. So there are other rules that you can set for yourself. What kind of pictures you'll post, what groups you're posting to, what types of discussions you'll get into. I do use social media, but I use it mostly for work. I tend to avoid, like Facebook, for instance, Facebook, Twitter. I don't post on Twitter too often, not Bashita, because it just doesn't, for me, it doesn't make sense, which is really the key thing here. For me, it does not make sense. So for me to be on Twitter all the time is just, a big fat waste of time. It's not going to do anything for me. I do use Facebook primarily for work-related stuff and for personal stuff a little bit. But again, I have some pretty personal, strict rules about what I will and won't post, which I'm not going to get into because they're not really relevant for most people. But everybody knows what their thing is. So create those rules for yourselves, But then the second thing is set yourself up to make it easier to stop and think about the things that don't fall into your general rules. Like, for instance, one of the things I often recommend to people is Facebook's great, especially if it's how you keep in contact with your family, whatever, but don't put it on your phone. Why? because the Facebook app, there are many reasons not to put it on your phone. But in this context, one really big thing is the Facebook app is designed to make it very easy to, and again, they talk about this, to reduce friction so that you take a picture, you have a thought, and just post, boom, 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 without thinking about it. And that's the problem. You don't think about it. And it is only later that you realize that maybe I shouldn't have said that, or you just do it and don't even come back to it. But maybe it wasn't such a great idea. And sometimes you do realize it wasn't such a great idea, but it's out there already. And sometimes you can take it down and sometimes not. But if you're taking pictures with your phone and then you have to go home or get back to your computer and then post them to Facebook or whatever, that helps you stop and think about, okay, should I really be posting this picture? And I mean, there are very often situations where posting pictures fine, but maybe you want to be more than fine, or maybe you should you stop and think and say, you know what, I'm going to post this with a more limited friend group. I'm going to post it only to the people who are my immediate friend and family group rather than to the world, whatever, for whatever reason. And there are a lot of good reasons to do that. And again, I'm not even necessarily talking about really bad stuff, but for instance, if you made a party, for the family and you want the family, to see pictures, that's nice. But maybe it's not such a great idea to post it to the whole world, right? Not everybody has to see everything that happened in your dining room, and again, everybody has their level, but it's easier to keep that kind of thing in check if you are posting after you had a chance to think about, is this picture really something I want to put out in the world in general? Is this something that I'd like to put out, but only for these people, etc.? So this is just an example of putting some friction back into the flow, making stuff just a touch harder to enable you to kind of not get into this just mindless, I'm going to post, I'm going to buy, I'm going to this, I'm going to that, whatever, because that's really a very, very, so there are two things. One is you just wind up doing stuff you don't think about, but also this is what helps create the cycle, because you get desensitized. You don't think about it, you do it. And then you look at what you've been posting and it's like, oh, okay, whatever, and you've gotten used to posting stuff that in the past you might have stopped short and said, hey, maybe I shouldn't do that. And if you keep on saying, hey, maybe I shouldn't do that, you never get sensitized to it. So that's the other piece of it. By being able to step back and keep yourself from doing stuff, you're less likely to get into a negative spiral. And again, the really key thing here is set yourself up for success and make it harder to make mistakes, because none of us is perfect. And setting up systems essentially for ourselves that encourage the good things and discourage the not such great things is a really good approach, not just to technology, but specifically to technology, because the most fundamental danger that technology poses is that it is an enabler. Okay, so it's an enabler for good stuff, but it's also an enabler for the stuff that's not so good. And therefore, we want to kind of shift the balance to be more enabling of the good stuff, but less enabling of the bad stuff. Okay, any questions? Questions, comments? You can comment in the Zoom or on the WhatsApps, on the live stream, which is a little bit behind. Okay, so since I see that there aren't any questions and comments at this point, just recap. Basically, you need to look at technology in the context of, in order to the way to deal with technology is to keep it as part of the rest of your life, not as a separate thing. You are a person in, wherever you are, including technology. You interface on technology the way you do with the rest of the world. You need to be a good citizen. You need to be a firm person on and off the internet, on and off your smartphone, your computer, whatever piece of technology it may be. Smartphone, dumb phone, whatever, it doesn't matter, right? It's all one thing, essentially. And it's important, by the way, to realize that because it's part of life, saying, I don't have a smartphone, so I'm not affected by this, doesn't really work. So that's just kind of like something to keep in the back of your mind. Not, again, that's not to say that you should get a smartphone because you're affected by other people's smartphones. It's more to say just it's good to be aware, but it's also good to be aware that if you do have the smartphone, you do have the internet, what you do and what you say affects other people, whether or not they have the internet, smartphones, etc. Because it's not two walled off gardens. If you say things, on Facebook that have real world implications for people who aren't on Facebook, you are still responsible for the effects of what you said, whether or not, whatever their choices are. At least it's essentially one thing. You need to be mindful, you need to be thoughtful, you need to understand that, be cognizant of the dangers without being hyper vigilant, because otherwise you wind up not being able to make good decisions. You either get frozen or you just ignore what you should not ignore, and you don't set yourself up for success, you set yourself up for failure. And when you make choices, both in the moment and the broader choices, you need to think about what you're trying to accomplish and how the thing you want to do will or won't help that. And part of those choices is creating some what we call friction in the flows that make it more likely for you to do things that maybe aren't the best things. So if you put some friction into those flows, it can give you a chance to step back and say, yes, this is something I really want to do. I think it's good. But at the same time say, oh, you know what? Maybe I really shouldn't do this other thing. Okay, so I hope everybody found this useful, and we will be having the next session on same time, same place next week on the 20th at 8:30. And I will be specifically addressing technology choices. How do you choose, all the things like cell phones, smartphones, computers, internet access, etc. Because again, like I said, the key before you can protect yourself, you need to make a choice about what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And you need to understand, how do you make those decisions? Like anything else, you have to make a decision that works for you and enables you. So that is what we will be discussing next week. Kol tov to everybody, and we shall see you next week.